Hello, everyone, to a special, exciting edition of Training Unleashed. Got a guest back, Curtis Bateman. He is VP of International Offices, which means this man earns miles. We could have a whole show on what he does with his air miles, but that's not the topic here today, is training. And I asked Curtis to come back because he's a change expert, literally wrote a book called, is it Just Change?
Change: How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity.
Yeah, a great book. And everyone is facing a big change, and that is how to deal with AI in their businesses. So I thought we would take this podcast to really discuss that. But before I get into that, I want to share a quote from the book, because I thought the quote from the book was just like the perfect quote. And that is, a change announcement doesn't equal change. And maybe quick just talk to that, because I think it's such an important point.
Yeah, I'd really like that you pulled that one out, Evan. So the reason we put that in there is experience tells us that leaders will sit in a boardroom or a conference room for days, weeks, months, trying to plan a change. And they've invested all of this time and energy and effort to make what they believe is a great decision. And then they show up to a town hall or to a big Zoom call and they announce the change. And unfortunately, they sometimes go back to the boardroom and work on the next thing, and they believe the change just miraculously happens. And what's gone on there is they've skipped all of the individuals in the organization going through that journey they've been on. Why are we changing? What are the inputs happening in the background that mean we need to change? And therefore, the people aren't ready to just wave the wand and make the change. And so that was a sentence or a paragraph we put in to try and help people realize once you announce the change, it's just the beginning, especially for leaders. They need to stay involved. They need to answer questions. They need to clarify. They need to paint a vision. So
Yeah.
I love that you stumbled onto that. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in engagement and involving people and staff. And one of the things about the book is the book really talks about the importance.
Mm.
So our primary topic today is artificial intelligence. And I think one way or another, virtually every business in some ways is going to have some form of major disruption
Yeah.
around AI. And I think in the world of training, it will disrupt the world of training too. So I would really love to have you go through the structure you have, talk about the zones, of how organizations should approach what they need to do, you know, as opposed to nothing, which a lot of people are sitting back and doing,
Just
you know,
watching. Yeah.
just watching it.
Yeah. Let's remind our listeners what the four zones are, and maybe if we can just talk through each zone and what an organization, a leader, and an individual could do in each of the four zones. So the first zone is the zone of status quo. That's the space before we introduce a change. Now, AI is out in the wild, but whether or not the organizations have chosen to do anything with it, that's the change we're talking about.
Yes.
The change gets introduced. Hey, we're going to do X, Y, Z with AI in our business. And that's the change that's announced. That leads us into that second zone, or the zone of disruption. That's the space where everybody goes, what in the world are you talking about? What does it mean? How does it impact me? How does it impact my job? What does it mean for me as a leader? The list of questions goes on and on and on. And they're just full of uncertainty because people aren't really sure what it means.
That's my favorite zone by the criteria of the name only.
Disruption.
Disruption.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a troubling space. It's highly individual, and it's a troubling space because people need to discover information, and leaders don't always have the answers to the questions. So sometimes it can take a little bit of effort to make it through that zone, all of which We're trying to work towards the point where we have enough clarity to say, okay, let's start working on the change. And as we move past that point of decision and start working on it, we enter the zone of adoption. This is a space of trial and error. It's a space where some things work, some things don't work. We might take steps backward, which organizations and leaders struggle with. We don't want failure. We don't want mistakes. But it's the space where we have to test, refine, learn, improve, and eventually find that we're making our way out of the change, meaning it's being implemented and we're successfully moving back to a level of comfort and predictable outcomes. This is a little bit of a dangerous space because sometimes people will think, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we're through that. Let's stop. And that's a mistake. It completely skips the fourth zone, which is where all of the benefit from the change comes. And that's the, okay, we're starting to figure this out. Now let's ask ourselves questions like, I wonder what else that could lead to, or what if we tried this? And those are the ideas that really start to create the new and added value of the change. So 4 zones, and that 4-zone pattern is true for every change. So let's take a minute and maybe apply it to this AI set of questions and talk about how it might work.
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So let's go back to zone of status quo. This is the comfortable, I know what to expect when I go to work zone. I've got my routine, I've got my comfort. But at this stage, this is where leaders are probably in the boardroom saying, okay, we've got to do something with this AI thing. I mean, everybody's talking about it. It's in the news. We're seeing it. We have to do something. And so they're trying to figure out where they can apply it. You referred to the L&D or the HR space, right, where we're developing people. That's true in that same space. How can we use AI to improve how we develop our people, how we give them opportunities to learn, to grow, and create leverage, because we're all living with these constrained budgets. So somebody has this bright idea and they said, let's introduce this change. We're going to use AI in this way. And they put it out there and they announce it. And that's the change that unleashes the zone of disruption. So leaders are thinking about what change to implement in the zone of status quo. But in the zone of status quo, as people, we're thinking about, oh man, this feels nice. There's not a change going on. That's a risky approach. What we should be doing if our organization hasn't announced anything to do with AI is we should be building our capability around it. What can we learn? What can we study? How does that apply to our industry? What might competitors be doing with AI? All of these things start to give us inputs that say, oh, okay, this is a little less scary than I thought. I have a better level of understanding. At whatever point they introduce it, I feel like I'm already starting to be prepared to do something about it. So resting on our laurels in the zone of status quo is a high-risk strategy. Preparing and trying to predict where this might go is a high investment approach to change from individuals. Zone of status quo. Does that make sense?
It does. As I sit here and I listen to you, as a business person, I want to skip the zone of disruption.
Yes.
Now, I know I can't do that.
Yeah.
But I think it would be good maybe to talk about how to minimize the zone of disruption and how to get buy-in and support to the disruption.
Yeah, that's such, first of all, your insight is, as a business leader, I want to skip it. I can't even begin to describe how many leaders choose to say it doesn't exist or we won't go through the zone of disruption, which is basically a statement saying we need to move fast on this. There's nothing wrong with that. The part that's wrong is pretending that the zone of disruption doesn't exist. So as leaders, our goal is to shorten it as much as possible and shrink it so that it's the least amount of impact possible. How do I do that? The first one is what we just talked about, the predict and prepare. Help people in the zone of status quo do things that will allow them to increase their knowledge, their confidence, and their capability around new areas. So if we think we might be introducing a tool, even before we make the announcement, invite people to go to seminars on AI or give people access to tools to play with, but do things that increase their comfort and decrease their uncertainty. That way, at the point we introduce the change, it's not this, oh my goodness, we just went over the edge in the roller coaster and we're going down at 100 miles an hour, right? There's a higher level. So the first thing is invest in the zone of status quo. Second thing is once you announce the change, the propensity for leaders is to monologue. We're going to announce the change, we're going to tell you, and then we're going to close the meeting and we're done. If we can shift from a monologue to a dialogue and say, what questions does that lead to? And even keep track of all the questions you don't know the answers to, because that acknowledges that we're humans, we're figuring it out together, we're in this together. And then make commitments around what are we going to do to answer the questions that none of us have the answers for. That helps
So
people
Curtis,
realize they're leaders in it with them. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I want to ask, why can't that dialogue take place in the zone of the status quo? Before we make the change, what
Yeah.
ideas do people have, open it up, have discussions of possible changes, and have them involved prior to deciding what the change is, because there is going to be disruption. There's not going to be unanimity of thought or anything of that nature. But getting the conversation going before the decision's made could perhaps produce better decisions and easier buy-in and dialogue.
Yeah, this skill of moving from monologue to dialogue as a leader is a skill you can use in all four zones. There's absolutely nothing wrong with pulling that earlier in the process. You're using the dialogue as a form of innovation and input. The dialogue after the change is announced will largely shift towards what does that mean to me and my team and the work I'm doing. But you can employ that skill and that engagement tool in the zone of status quo without question. What you shouldn't do is set it aside saying we've had all the discussion and after we announce the change, there's not going to be disruption. You still have to come back to that
Right.
because there will be a separate set of questions that people want answered.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. So that's the second thing we can do to shrink the zone of disruption. The third thing we can do as leaders is to recognize that even though the change is being announced and it's the same change for the whole organization, the impact is largely individual. I like to equate it to if we're in a little boat in the ocean and a storm comes up, Evan, you might be in a boat that looks like a yacht, and I might be in a canoe. We're in the same storm, but our circumstances might be different. And as a leader, one of the things I can do to help people move quickly through that zone is to engage with them individually and acknowledge what might be going on. I might have really trying personal circumstances at home. You might be thinking about what's next in your career. And just by default, that makes where we are when the change is introduced different. So a leader that will engage each person on their team in a unique way can help them accelerate through that process. So that's the zone of disruption.
Maybe if we could talk a little bit about the role of training and leadership and development in terms of the zone of disruption and the role that people, this podcast is Training Unleashed.
Yeah,
It can help.
let's do that. Good. Yeah. Um, Developing people is a pretty special responsibility that L&D and HR people have in departments, right? We're helping people grow and become a better version of themselves. And that's true for leaders, frontline leaders, that's true for mid-level leaders, and it's true for individuals. So one of the things we can be doing both in the zone of status quo and sometimes in the zone of disruption is developing some of these, in one instance, leadership capabilities. How do I communicate better around change? How do I establish vision? How do I declare my intent? How do I make sure I engage my people? And those are training, development opportunities for leaders. But as you do train on those topics, let's say you're training on communication, since we've been focusing on it, make sure that some of the training stops and says, how does the skill of communication apply specifically when we're leading change? Because there are some things you need to do uniquely when you lead change and you're trying to communicate. So that would be my one commentary around all of the leadership development. Make sure you have breakouts, discussions, activities where you say, how do we apply this to a change context? So they get a chance to be very intentional around that. For individuals, the same ideas are true. We need to develop them and help them grow so that they're more prepared and more resilient as they approach training. In that instance, I would say that's training specifically around change capability. How do I recognize a predictable pattern? How do I recognize, based on what I'm thinking, feeling, and doing, where I might be in the change process? But that is all training-based opportunity to help people be ready for change.
Let me take a moment and talk to you about something really big happening at the Learning Network. A lot of people think extended reality, like virtual reality, augmented reality, 360, etc., is about tomorrow. We're not there yet. We're not ready. Let me tell you, the Learning Network is ready today. We are doing incredible things. And the amazing thing is, it's not as expensive as you think, and the return on investment is incredible. Learn more. Visit learning.net to learn about the future of training at the Learning Network.
So in the zone of disruption, we are really working to get our people clear around what's changing, why is it changing, and what will be the impact on them. As they understand that, they'll make a decision that says, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm in on this AI change thing. And the next zone is the part where the strategic decision to use AI in the business and the actual practical implementation of it start to intersect. So we've got our people on board, we've got the change announced, and the zone of adoption is where we're saying, how are we going to do this? Not what are we going to do, how are we going to do it? And as you get into the how, this is where we want people to have permission to try new things, to explore what if, to actually have moments where they try something and it doesn't work, and collectively the team says, what did we learn? And if we take what we learned and we apply it to the vision and the how, then we make discoveries. And that's where we start to create new and better ways of doing things. We create a new AI tool. Maybe it's on a phone. We create a new AI chatbot that interacts with our customers in a certain way. We create some kind of AI automation that might exist in a manufacturing process. But whatever it is, this is the zone where the strategy and the implementation of it intersect. And it is a period of trial and error. And so as a leader, I need to help people take the opportunity to try new things, help them learn from it, and encourage them to keep trying rather than get discouraged and slide backwards into the change. And this is a hard space for people. None of us feel like we have time for setbacks. None of us feel like we can afford the cost of it. And yet this is how we need to activate the creativity to get the new outcomes. So it's a really interesting space for leaders to make that work.
You know what I think is fascinating about the AI space is once you've learned the tools and you start using them, they are massive time givers.
They are.
You're faster, you're smarter, you're brighter. I'm very dyslexic, so for me, they're just a gift in terms of writing and things of that nature. But there's that hump at the beginning where it's harder and longer.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how to use the tools. You gotta, for me, I listened to a lot of webinars, I, did a lot of research, and, so almost any change, not just AI change, there's that adoption period where the benefit doesn't appear to be there.
That's right.
And you have to sort of prepare people for that.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Which is why back to an earlier comment made about leaders skipping the zone of disruption, right? In the zone of disruption and the zone of adoption, there's a U-shaped dip in the change model.
Yeah.
That dip represents the cost of the change, the cost of adopting it. Maybe it's the employee engagement cost. Maybe there's SG&A cost, whatever it is, there is a cost associated with it. And it may be a productivity cost to start with, just like you're describing. It's funny. We're just launching an AI tool and we're experiencing this. It's part of our platform. It allows interactivity. It allows people to role play. And it's just like you're describing. It doesn't feel faster. It feels a little nervous, but there's so much opportunity in it once you get over that hump.
Yeah. I'm going to get a little off topic here, but I think this is really important. And, I think about my parents who did not embrace the internet age the way I embraced the internet age. And so for me, I have a personal motive. I have a vision, which is I never want to be behind on technology because I never want to be old. Right? Where I saw my father who could barely do email and my mother who can't remember a password to save her life. Fortunately, my father's passed. Fortunately, my mother doesn't listen to the show. But so I'm like, to stay young, I've got to stay on top of things. That's my personal vision. How do companies create the vision of why this change is so important? Because we've seen how many companies go out of business because they can't keep up with change.
Yeah.
Sears, closed, Kmart closed, Zales closed, Ames closed. I can go on in department stores just alone. But there's so many companies that die because they don't change. How do you create a vision within the organization, and what part of the zone process is that vision really created?
Yeah, the zone process would point clear back to the zone of status quo and say, when leaders are considering future changes to introduce, that's where they're envisioning. Now,
Yeah,
hopefully they don't wait till that point. Hopefully, the four zones, the fourth zone really connects to the first zone, right? It's a cycle that repeats. So hopefully in the zone of innovation, leaders are already starting to consider what might be next. What have we learned? What might be next? The the leadership skill or capability around vision and change happens right at the end of status quo where you announce a change. That's where the leader is standing up and saying, I can see out into the future based on everything we're learning, and this is where we need to go next. And I'm painting a picture, a compelling vision of where we're going and why we're going there so that I can engage the hearts and minds of my people to go through the next three zones again with a new change. If a leader finds himself in a state of complacency in the zone of status quo, that's where there's risk. That's where there's the Sears or the Zales risk. That's where there's we should be doing something here, and they need to be pretty actively looking for it, or they're at risk of becoming obsolete.
as I sit here and I listen to you, I realize that a company could be in so many different zones simultaneously in so many different parts of the company.
Yep.
Right? Because these four zones could be happening in the marketing space, could be happening in the training department, could be happening in production. Not all about AI. Some could be AI initiatives that are different in each one, but they can all be about different things. A company could literally have hundreds of different change things that potentially, well, they can't all be in different zones because you don't have 100 zones, but you get my point. Um, and which is actually, a dynamic thing for a healthy company to be doing.
Yeah. This is a point I wrestled with. I've been working on this for 25 years. This is a point I really wrestled with for a number of years. The propensity, people at leaders organizations, they want to try and map all of these onto one big model. and it's just too overwhelming. So I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but I do think this is an important point. It's really critical if I'm the marketing person leading a change that I have the discipline to say, what is the change model for this change that I'm leading? To almost take it out of time and space and say, this is my top priority and what I'm focusing on. Maybe I have 3 changes I'm leading, but I would view each of those changes as here's one change, here's the other change, and here's the other change. Which zone are we in? Why are we there? And as a leader, what do I need to be doing next to move my people through it? Now, if you're a leader saying, oh, I've got 30 of these changes, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to fail at all of them. You've got to narrow it down and tackle 1 to 3 at a time. You can't do more than that at a time.
Well, I think it's interesting because as we're training Unleashed, the person running the training department, or whatever you want to call the department, has to be thinking about all their change initiatives, all the different things that they're managing. And you're totally right. Which brings us to the other great book written by Covey people, which is the 4 disciplines of execution.
That's right.
And it's interesting to just think about the complexities of big businesses versus small businesses, and then businesses that have more than one business under the umbrella of their businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Which always, makes me in awe of, companies like Apple and Disney, where they're in so many different places, how a CEO of one of those companies can keep up with the massive amounts of initiatives and changes that are taking place. And they really need to be ahead of us, because they're providing the tools to empower a lot of the change that the rest of the world is seeing.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I love those reflections. So true. Absolutely true. The one thing I would say, you glance through the training department. One of the things the training department can be doing in all of this, they often can ride alongside a leader and be a coach during the change process. And that is to make sure that the people you're coaching, the different line leaders, don't allow too many initiatives to be taking place at once, or they'll fail. And so that is a very vital role the training group can play, and bring the right tools to the leader to help them. Your team is at the zone of adoption on this change. Here are a couple of tools you can use. Let's keep the focus so that we can make progress. Otherwise,
Yeah.
everything slows down or stops.
Yeah. In a
Can we
lot of work,
take
in a
our
lot of,
AI up through the last zone, Evan, or do we have time for that?
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. Because this is important, and it's easy to not get to this zone. The zone of innovation. Some people say, well, doesn't innovation start in the zone of adoption? It does. But that creativity is the very tip of the change. And we're starting to get back to a level of output that matches where we started. To your point with AI, it feels like it's taking more to use it to start with. Okay, now it's working. I'm using the tools. I'm at the level of productivity where I was. How do I 1.5 or 2x or 3x the outcomes of that? And that's where in the zone of innovation, we're sharing the journey we've been on with others outside our organization, outside our team. And they'll ask questions like, well, did you ever think about this? Or we'll have a team meeting where we say, I wonder if we did this, what it would lead to. And it's those curiosity questions that then add an accelerant to what was started in the zone of adoption. And that's what leads us to more and more innovation and more growth. So curiosity questions, get curious in the zone of innovation to say, what else could we do with this? And that's going to be great value. Yeah.
What I think is the brilliance of your model is you build in change and adjustment, as opposed to assuming that whatever idea comes out is the perfect idea.
Yeah.
And because it rarely ever is. So I think It's fabulous. We're going to take a shift now, Curtis, and we're going to talk about FranklinCovey, because the thing that comes clear to me is training people on change and training people on understanding the 4 zones is probably something a lot of companies need to do, not just around AI, but around everything. How does Covey work with companies that want to do that kind of training?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's the space we love. So I'm happy to talk about it. So FranklinCovey.com, you can start to see all of the different places where we work to create more effective leaders and effective individuals. And there's a lot that we do there. People work with us. It's usually organizational. Organizations will come get a license with us. We'll look at a business need that they're trying to address, and we'll design an impact or a learning journey that leverages what we offer against their needs and finds a way to help these training departments or these line leaders develop their people. And so you're right, there is training on this. There's 3 different modules on change, both modules for individuals and leaders. We cover topics like trust, individual effectiveness. We talk about how to manage our time, how to build culture. The list goes on and on of places where we lean in and help organizations. What I would say to any of the listeners is, if you're familiar with us historically or not familiar with us, if you go look at our website, we offer all of these webinars at no charge. On our topic today of AI, one of our executive team has been researching AI for 2 years, and he just recently ran a really intriguing webinar about it. You can go get access to it and learn about it. So there are resources where you can understand what we do and how we do it at no charge. Come learn, come connect with us, and we'd love for you to just understand a little bit about how we could maybe be adding value to your organization.
Well, I will say this. I'm a big fan of your company. And I think FranklinCovey has leading edge content. What I love about you is you constantly are updating your content, where a lot of people let content be stagnant, and your content's practical. So I enjoyed reading your book. I highly recommend. I'm lying. I listened to your book.
I read it, so you listened to me for hours. I apologize for that.
You had other voices interjected though.
We did. Yeah,
So
we did.
there was a little relief.
Yeah.
Although your voice is excellent. My book, I paid someone to read the book because no one wants to listen to me for any length of time. Curtis, you've been a great guest. We always end with one tip. Do you have a tip to share for our
Yeah.
audience?
Yeah. And it's a different one than I shared last time. I think this time when we're talking, the tip I'd like to leave is, just like AI is a brand new thing in the world, there will be the next new thing and the next new thing. And they're all going to mean there's changes coming our way. And rather than resist it, avoid it, ignore it, I would say develop the capability to lean into it. My experience is, as we develop our capability and lean into it, these changes always lead to new opportunities. And so I would say, work now, start now, zone of status quo, build your change capability, and lean into all these cool future changes that are coming our way that are going to make the world better, our working environment better, and lead to new opportunities for each one of us.
I love that tip. What's the name of the guy that's known for like the strongest will survive?
Like Charles Darwin, is that what you're talking about?
Charles Darwin. Thank you.
Okay.
He has a quote, because I think, at least from this quote, is he says it's not the strongest in the species that will live the longest. It's the people that are able to adapt
Yeah.
that will survive the longest. I'm obviously mangling the quote, but it's, to your point, the ability to change and adapt is the key to survival of yourself as a human being. I like to always think, if everyone works in a business but everyone in themselves is a brand unto themselves.
Yeah.
And of course, another motivator is just to think if you don't adapt, you're getting old. That's my
Yeah.
motivator.
Ward up. That's good.
So Curtis, on behalf of the Learning Network, I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank our sponsors, C-Suite TV and C-Suite Radio. Remind everyone you can catch us on YouTube now, the Training Unleashed Network, and you can subscribe, and everyone have a great day.